This is meant to give a term today, and it's meant to just define it. In our "What Is" series, I'm defining terms, but it's really meant to give you a term if you've never heard it. It's one that's kicked around a lot in modern app discussions or app modernization, or what is a modern app. We talked about that earlier this week, and of course, yesterday we talked about legacy apps and what those look like. I'm gonna give you a word, and the word is monolith. Now, if you've not been a part of these discussions, that word is sort of strange, but a monolithic app, or an app that is all in one box, we'll say, is an application that number one, does not easily support distributed teams. Number two, does not support microservices, or again, microservices thinking. We talked about that when we talked about a modern app. If you don't have an application, if you're in this discussion, I mean, you really understand what app modernization is about, but you've made a conscious decision, as some people will do, a valid conscious decision to not use microservices. That's probably fine, and that probably doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a modern app. But what it could mean is you've applied microservices thinking, and so if you can't apply microservices thinking because your app is so highly coupled to itself, meaning it is a stovepipe of value, very difficult to break out and leverage value or data or services or functionality from other components, or therefore it becomes really difficult to take that and break it apart and give it to multiple teams, then you are probably suffering from a legacy app. We talked about that yesterday, but you also very possibly have a monolithic app. One of the ways, and we didn't talk about this when we talked about app modernization, modern apps, or legacy apps in the last 3 days, but one thing I will say is a modern app thinks about the web. So we talked about interoperability. I don't want to leave out the crew that don't already have their applications hosted in a web browser. So whether that be because you built now this is honestly a little bit harder to do if you've got a mobile app, though a mobile app can be a monolith, and a mobile app can be a legacy app, because of course mobile's been around a long enough to have avoided some of the more modern trends, and b, this is about development and distribution and networking. So a modern app leverages, of course, those things. So a legacy app does not. But a mono repo, or a mono app, or a monolith in terms of a legacy app is it is often, especially for desktop deployed apps, one that is non-network distributed. So if you're pushing an application to client desktops, if you happen to be, this is frequent in healthcare and other contexts where security, and well, first of all, apps have been around a long time, and we weren't really thinking modern web, which is a different topic, really. You can have a legacy app developed for modern web. So I won't talk about that exactly, but the idea is, if you haven't taken the step for lots of reasons to make your app a web application and it's still hosted through an installed app, all these patterns apply. So you can have a mono repo or a monolithic application, but you can also apply, again, microservices thinking, decoupling at the application layer. By the way, just to kind of tie it all together, I've been around software development long enough to have remembered when service orientation, or SOA, service-oriented architectures, hit the scene. A lot of that same design thinking is what I mean when I say, and I've said it over the last couple of days, microservices thinking. It's really about having loosely coupled services that can be leveraged from a variety of contexts. So in the service-oriented architecture world, if you're familiar with that, if you've been around software long enough to remember when people talked about SOA, or service-oriented architecture, a lot of the themes then apply now. And so beyond that, though, a monolithic application would attempt to accomplish that problem, or solve that problem of decoupling and service enablement, all within one repository, so that it didn't support things like distributed teams, or didn't support agile software development quite as well, or didn't support DevOps and incremental release of small components, again, quite as well. Certainly wasn't necessarily by design made for the cloud and leveraging platform as a service technology at the database and application hosting layers. So again, I want to represent a little bit of what monolith means, or a monolithic app means, but also help everyone understand that you may have done things like applied microservices thinking, or what it used to be called service-oriented architecture, services enablement, but you may still have a monolithic app. And that monolithic app in the legacy context means one that does not support decoupling easily, one that does not support distributed teams easily. Agile software becomes difficult. DevOps becomes difficult in a monolithic